Let me start by acknowledging that I'm on the territory of Wasanic peoples and Wasanic Nation. The name of my riding, Saanich Gulf Islands, the whole Saanich Peninsula. Saanich is an anglicized mispronunciation of Wasanic. And so suddenly everybody get so in the language of the peoples on whose territory I'm honored to live, I'll raise my hands to you and say Hashka Siam, thank you and welcome, and honoring all the Greens in North Okanagan-Shuswap. I particularly want to say a big thank you to Mark down there in the corner. He's now moved into my corner. I have to move him up so I can see him. But Mark, great, and all of you, great job in the 2019 election. And not to say that Chris George didn't do a great job in 2015 at 5% of the vote, but my gosh, you doubled it. So that's a good start. Next year, next time around, we just have to do that again. and Mel Arnold will be packing his bags and not going to Ottawa. So I want to thank you, because it's not easy running a successful campaign, and we had to get more than 10%, as you know, because now you're able to actually have gotten the funding back from Elections Canada. It's a really good start for the next election, and it's terrific you did that. So it's also, as you probably all know, there were only, out of 338 ridings across Canada, only 49 got more than 10%. So it's no small feat, and I'm really glad to be able to join you. I know it's described as a keynote speech, but I kind of give a different keynote when I'm sitting at home in my office versus standing at a podium and railing about things. I just thought I'd reflect a bit on where we are in the world right now, and then reflect a bit on what it is to be a Green in the world right now. Where we are in the world right now, of course, is locked up at home. It is the weirdest thing, the weirdest thing. Now, of course, I'm not locked up at home all the time. I've had to go to Ottawa frequently, and every time I go to Ottawa, when I come home here to Sydney, I isolate for 2 weeks. So I'm spending a lot of time in my apartment, wishing I could, get some exercise, be outside, be normal. It's a very weird thing. But the more phenomenal thing about it really is that I think this experience of pandemic is the death of neoliberalism, which is the first of many silver linings. I say that because many generations, and when I last saw your faces here, I think most of us are around the same generation, but I, being a 1954 baby, I think in the last generation that has a feeling of personal family connection to the Second World War and to the Depression, has a memory of government stepping up and getting people out of depression, government stepping up and fighting fascism. In other words, it crystallized for me at a moment when my dad, who was British and who through his whole adolescence had been in the Home Guard, and I imagine somebody on this call is probably also originally from the UK. It tends to happen a lot in Canada. But my dad, through his adolescence, the people who surrounded him, family, friends, the neighborhood, because he was just outside of London, I mean, the Blitz killed people he was close to all the time. Houses were demolished. He'd spend time, he told me, in his Home Guard job, they'd go into seniors' homes and help them paper over the windows so that when the glass shattered, it wouldn't scatter into the house and injure people. And so all of that was going on in my dad's adolescence. And then he joined the Army. And then, so just to say that, and Heather's reflected on the fact that, I was doing environmental work in Cape Breton as a kid and always did do it. But one of the times we were fighting something, we were fighting offshore oil and gas, nearshore oil and gas, frankly, in the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And the oil and gas companies wanted to drill right along the coast between the sort of northwest coast of Cape Breton and Prince Edward Island. It's a beautiful area of the Gulf of St. Lawrence. And they wanted to put natural gas wells in the near shore, and the crab fishermen were fighting it, and we were fighting it, and it was constant. And at that point, my dad turned to me and said, I think I really preferred the Second World War. Yeah, I said, well, my nickname for him was Squire. And I said, Squire, how how on earth could you feel that you preferred the Second World War? I mean, you lost, yeah. Another thing, of course, when we were little kids, we could never go to fireworks displays because these days we would have known to say my dad had PTSD, but we didn't know the term. But we couldn't go to fireworks displays because my mom would say, your dad will break out in a cold sweat. It's just terrifying for him. We're not going to fireworks. So anyway, this idea that he really preferred the Second World War, I said, how on earth could you possibly have preferred the Second World War? And he said, well, in those days, we really felt the government was on our side. Yeah, so I thought, oh, okay. So back to neoliberalism. We've been told since this era of Reagan and Thatcher that government is there to pick your pocket. Smaller government's always better. The private sector does everything better than, and Naomi Klein made this point in This Changes Everything, that in order to confront and survive the climate emergency, we have to restore the public sphere. We have to recognize that we need to pay more taxes, that we have to have a governmental response. You can't just sit back and hope the private sector is going to solve it for you. And a big part of why we haven't solved the climate crisis has been neoliberalism. And I know some people think it's capitalism. It might be capitalism, but it's mostly neoliberalism, because we had capitalism at the Depression and the Second World War, and you still had, as the famous story that Lester Brown tells in on the Planet Earth, what is it? Is this Planet Earth 2.0? The story of no, Plan B for Planet Earth. Lester Brown tells the story of Franklin Roosevelt calling and talking to the big car manufacturers in the U.S. and saying, now you can't make cars anymore. We need you to make tanks. And they said, sorry, we make money on cars. Go stuff it. And then they passed a law. You'll probably know the stories. They passed a law that said it's now illegal to make cars. You are all making tanks. There's a really big gap if you've never experienced a government stepping up. So again, that was, the U.S. was still capitalist, but it wasn't letting corporations tell them what to do. And neoliberalism's arrival has so shrunk the sphere for government that even when, I've been arguing climate change, climate emergency for years, and even politicians who think they agree with me say, well, we can't do that. I mean, that would be like, wow, gee, how would we do that so fast? I mean, we'd have to get So now that we've had the COVID experience, we've seen that our heroes have not been the billionaire class. Our heroes are frontline workers, public sector workers, essential workers, people not paid very much, like long-term care home employees, and who has stepped up and spent billions of dollars. It's our money, sure. But if the government didn't organize and move as fast as they did, things would be much, much worse. And we are celebrating Bonnie Henry, and we're celebrating Theresa Tam. So we're not celebrating the pharmaceutical lobby. In fact, for the first time, we're actually having people say, we can't let the big pharma make money out of this, and we can't continue to accept as normal that seniors die in long-term care homes because they're so inadequate and they're for profit. And we can't go, so this whole conversation that we can't go back to what we thought was normal because normal was not acceptable. That's a dramatic shift. But so too is recognizing that when government sees a real threat to human life, they are capable of acting. And more than that, which is, I've said in Parliament a few times, this is the first time in my lifetime that governments have reacted to say, you know what? Life is more important than money. We have to shut down our economy. We have to do it deliberately, because otherwise instead of having thousands of people die or tens of thousands globally, we'll have millions and millions and millions. So we're not out of the woods yet, but I think the moment for Greens is it's kind of all of our ideas and all of our policies that have always been ahead of their time. Now it's our time. And I can share with you, because this might go on a website, so I shouldn't share a private conversation with cabinet ministers. But there's a widespread acknowledgement, even within the Liberal cabinet, that this changes a lot, that they can't go back to the way things were, that a lot has changed. And I'd say that a lot of climate awareness, fingers crossed, that a lot of climate awareness has changed. So we have a time right now to try very, very hard to make sure things don't slide backwards, that we don't end up having the voices that say we've got to get the economy going, and that means more oil and gas and coal. We have to shut all that down, and we have to fight really hard on that. And I can share that Paul Manley, Jenica Atwin, and I have been having a lot of success quietly with influence in this pandemic in a way that we couldn't have had in normal times. And one of the reasons for that is that everybody's working from home, which means that even the most powerful cabinet minister is more accessible. They don't have their gatekeepers around them, and I'm on email and on the phone and on Zoom on a pretty regular basis with a ton of cabinet ministers on a ton of public policy ideas, and so is Paul Manley, and so is Jenica. It's a very different, I mean, I wish Mark was there with us. There are a ton of Greens that should have won in the election, and I deeply regret the mistakes that were made. But we're able to make a difference in Parliament. We'll make a bigger difference with more Greens, which brings me to the other moment that we're in for Greens. I'm just going to take a sip of the cup of tea I have here, just a sec. My husband placed a cup of tea down next to me just as I started talking, and I've been dying for a sip. So anyway, where we are as Greens is obviously we're in a federal leadership race, we're in a provincial leadership race, and we don't know when the government's going to fall provincially or federally. So we also have to be election ready in a pandemic, and we have to pick really strong, good new leaders. I'm public about who I'm supporting for the BC leadership race. I hope all the federal Greens on this call and your colleagues and friends know to join up for the Green Party of British Columbia for this race. The BC Greens have done something the federal Greens have not done, which is to make it possible to vote for the next leader of the BC Green Party without actually joining the party, just going online and saying, I want to vote. So I think that's interesting. I hope it works out okay. I do support Sonia Furstenau. I think she's extraordinary and I love her. But the others are good and I want to get them elected to the legislature. I just happen to think we really need for the BC Greens to do really well. And frankly, for the federal Greens to do really well, it's always better to have the next leader be someone who's already elected. And if Paul Manley or Jenica Atwin had been willing to run, that'd be great. But we've got 9 really interesting candidates and we have a leadership race federally. And a lot hangs on having a strong leader and a good leader and somebody who takes us to the next level. I'm very committed to what I think of as one of the rare examples of good succession planning in politics, which is to stick around to support the next leader. So I plan to run again in Saanich Gulf Islands. It wasn't easy to win a seat in Parliament. I don't want to leave it too soon. I want to get reelected and I want to work going across the country the way I did in 2019 to get more people elected everywhere and help the new leader be able to concentrate on winning in their own riding, plus all the other things that'll drag them across the country. So I've been thinking about it a lot. It's hard to think of good examples of the leader of one party supporting their successor. Surely, I think everyone remembers that in 2019, Tom Mulcair wasn't running around to help Jagmeet Singh. Stephen Harper wasn't helpful to Andrew Scheer. He really doesn't like him. And I mean, really, can you imagine Andrew Scheer being so unlikable that even Stephen Harper doesn't like him? It's amazing. But but anyway, to look to the positive, the last time I remember a leader of a federal party who was popular stepping down and helping a successor, it was Alexa McDonough supporting Jack Layton. And she stayed in the House. She just stayed there working with the new leader, Jack Layton, and her having a role. And that's what I want to do. I hope I get reelected. I hope I get the chance to come and help your local campaign efforts, because I don't think Greens are going to form government, and I don't think we need to form government to make a difference. My colleagues all around the world, whether it's the New Zealand Greens, who, by the way, face elections September 27th. So if you have any friends in New Zealand, make sure they're voting Green. Don't let them, Jacinda Ardern, we love her. Everyone loves Jacinda Ardern, but they have mixed member proportional, and everybody should vote for James Shaw and his Maori co-leader. They should all vote Green in New Zealand, and that would be fine. But we've got Greens around the world, and we are stronger when we support each other everywhere. And in British Columbia, I think Horgan is itching for an election this fall, which is despicable. And it's awful the way that Horgan has, I think, betrayed the spirit of the confidence and supply agreement in terms of pushing through with Site C and clear cutting the hell out of our old growth. But that's BC politics. Speaking to where we are federally, I'm so blessed that the Green MPs who were elected, although way too few of us, are such fine people. Today, Jenica Atwin was in Parliament in a 5-minute question and answer session. Just brilliant work, so solid, so good, fighting for Clinic 554 for abortion services in Fredericton, then changing course to talking about gender inclusive language and embracing non-binary, pan and trans individuals, and then shifting back to why we need to act to protect people from wellness checks, particularly the 2 Indigenous people who were killed in June in New Brunswick, Rodney Levi and a member of the New Chalmouth Nation, whose family friends are very dear friends of mine, Chantel Moore. We as Greens fight across many fronts. We do it in Parliament every day, and we need to elect more Greens whenever the next election comes. So I don't know what you had in mind for me for a keynote. Don't know how much time you have. I know you have another speaker. If anyone wants to ask me questions, I'm totally cool with that. But if you're out of time for my segment, I'll just sit around and listen and sip my tea for a while.
I think we can open the floor to a few questions.
Elizabeth?
Yes.
You mentioned that out of 339 ridings, only how many got 10%?
338 ridings, 49 got 10% or more.
Wow.
Some got really close to 10%, like so close it just kills you they didn't get there. But yeah, 49 ridings got 10% or more. So good work. No small feat. And I'm sure you didn't get a lot of help from anywhere. So good job.
Am I on?
Yep.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for the nice words, but that is the team that did it. I had such a fantastic team supporting me. That was my first run at this, and I had a bit of a taste of it from a distance in the past through my father in the European Union and so on. But it's different when you're the center, front and center of everything.
Yeah.
But it is a relatively small team that accomplished a hell of a lot, and that is what I certainly want to make sure that it is known. And I have run into many questions of certain questions from many people. That is whether I would run again, and I would certainly, and I've thought a lot about it. I would certainly offer my candidacy again for nomination in the next.
Hooray! And each time we have to run, I have to run for my own nomination too. We can't take anything as an assumption, but I think that's great news. Thank you.
Thanks very much. And then they can mute my microphone after I thank you for showing up. And I think I'm just as much as a fan of Heather, but I don't talk as long about it.
Elizabeth, I have a question for you. Can you hear me? Okay. So in times of great change, it also means there's a lot of opportunity. And yeah, over the years, I've thought that one of the big things missing is kind of this sense of historical scale, what you mentioned before, like having a memory of large mobilizations in order to respond to a crisis. Right, so that's more top of mind now. I wonder if you could mention a couple of particular areas where you think at a federal level there would be an opportunity for change because of what's happened over the last 6 months.
I think the opportunities are enormous. I'm going to sort of walk through them. There has never been, not just have I not seen it, there has never been as much support for guaranteed livable income as there is now. And a lot of people are, I mean, and members of parliament are talking about it a lot and super interested in how it would work. And the CERB, in a weird way, was kind of a dry run on what it might look like to have a guaranteed livable income. And people are realizing, gee, if we'd had that before the pandemic, everything would have been so much easier to cope with during the pandemic. We're also seeing a lot of interest in pharmacare and recognizing that our healthcare system needs more attention. I think a wealth tax has gained far more interest than it ever had before, and also modern monetary theory. It is I get more people willing to talk about it with me who say, well, that might be worth, because obviously all the economies around the world are doing the same things. All the G20 central banks are essentially doing quantitative easing to flood their markets. So they get the billions and trillions of dollars has entered economies through central bank decision making to keep things more or less stable and prevent runs on the bank and all of that. So and people have gone into, the governments around the world have taken steps to keep interest rates almost to zero. At some point, though, they're worried, and I'm advocating for and Greens have advocated for a 21st century version of the Bretton Woods talks. We can't rewrite the genetic code. We can't rewrite viruses. We can't rewrite COVID-19 and the way it behaves. And we sure can't rewrite global atmospheric chemistry and physics. But we can rewrite the rules for the economy. And I like to remind other politicians, as you know, the Bretton Woods Institution, when they created the Bretton Woods Conference, created the International Monetary Fund for the purpose of setting fixed currency rates. And then they decided not to do that anymore. Well, if this is, as many of us believe, a hinge moment in history, then things open up to do some different things, which would be, I think if Canada all on our own were to say, okay, we better start printing our own money and spending it to pay off our debts, we might face some blowback. But if we can form an international conference on the lines of Bretton Woods, so these are the kinds of big things I can now talk about with cabinet members, and they don't run away. The other, of course, the biggest thing is to get a handle on the climate emergency. And was one of those moments through the pandemic period, and I should actually have described to you what it was like when I was doing this keynote part. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen in my life, absolutely inspirational and totally exhausting and stressful. From the moment we adjourned Parliament March 13th till at least mid-June, there were no days off in government. We had daily briefings, technical briefings from senior civil servants, Monday to Friday and Saturday and Sunday, every day, unremittingly, answering questions, listening to our concerns. So in terms of shifting things in that period, we started hearing about the potential for a bailout for fossil fuels. And I worked the phone lines and emails, and I was in touch with, so many ministers, and said, we can only support this if you are focusing on fossil fuel workers. We can support aid to fossil fuel workers, but not to the businesses. And I circulated a lot of the stuff that was in Mission Possible about abandoned oil wells and got them convinced that that would work. So outside of a pandemic, I wasn't going to be able to convince them not to put more money into fossil fuels. I think now they really get it. They can't put any more money into fossil fuels. And they're really becoming, so Mission Possible is still driving ahead in a way that, it's driving ahead now in a way it couldn't have pre-pandemic. And I'm glad we did all that work. I wish it had gotten us votes. I wish people had read it, all that. I wish environmental groups had noticed we had the best policies and that the NDP was only marginally better than the Liberals. But never mind. Right now, we have the solid number crunching background documents that I can now share with people in cabinet. Say, oh, okay, then we could do that. So the scale of change right now and the potential is on multiple levels, internationally, in terms of our economic policies, in terms of social justice. Oh, of course, and justice for Indigenous peoples, that never goes away as a priority. So and of course, energy policies and climate. A lot of this is gelling around what does the next economic stimulus package look like? I don't know that we've yet posted on the website the submission that Paul and Jenica and I just made to Bill Morneau, but it's very detailed, and it's got a lot of the same crunching of numbers that the Parliamentary Budget Office gave us for our platform, the call for a wealth tax, the call for going after offshore tax havens. We are at a moment which could really honestly change everything, or not, in which case we're sitting at home watching an apocalypse that only gets worse. As my brother said to me the other day from Cape Breton, he said, my brother's so funny anyway. He said, I never really imagined that I'd be sitting at home watching the end of the world on my own TV while being able to smoke legal weed that I order through the government liquor store that gets delivered to the local general store that I go pick up at Fletcher Lawrence's general store. So that's a wrinkle I didn't see coming. So one way or another, things are changing.
I have a question.
Sure, Corey. First, I want to thank you for being CEO of the EDA, a thankless task for which I want to thank you.
Thank you. Much appreciated. Thanks, Elizabeth. There's been something that's been going on in my mind for about the last decade, and I've been wondering, why hasn't anybody done this? And it's create a free trade or a economic agreement between responsible governments, ethically responsible governments, like ethically investing. And sure, we'd be doing a lot of trade with Scandinavia, but I guess what I'm saying is to develop an ethical trade bloc, and I really think that would really be a game changer.
I think it's brilliant. I mean, obviously, the way in which we have conceptualized trade is regionally. So, Mercosur, EU, and now we can call it COSMA. Although, we had a big victory in that one too, to get rid of the investor state agreement in NAFTA. And I spent a lot of time lobbying Chrystia Freeland on that. You know what? I tell you, I think from the get-go, she knew we wanted to get rid of that, but because Trump wanted to get rid of it first, she held back, and then she went for it. But we got rid of the energy chapter of NAFTA, and we got rid of chapters, and we got better, moderately better environmental provisions in the North American Commission for Environmental Cooperation. But back to your point, why not? I mean, it's not as if trade is any longer limited by your border towns. And boy, oh boy, it better not be, because we can't open our border with the US. I mean, I know we're taking goods across the border, but boy, oh boy, the US right now is so scary. No, that's a great idea. And I don't know why anybody, including me, had never thought of it. So thank you. Greens are pushing for new trade agreement strategies. And if you've read Vision Green ever, there's a good section, I think it's still there, on how we should mobilize globally and make undo all the investor state agreements through a reform on what corporate rights and responsibilities are within trade agreements. Because there are so many bilateral investment treaties out there that it really ties the hands of many, many governments around the world being able to stop a toxic waste facility or ban a toxic chemical without worrying that that they'll face a lawsuit they'll lose because of how completely perverse the whole concept of investor state agreements is. But that's in Vision Green, is something that we advance through the Global Greens. We have a Global Greens Parliamentary Association, and we actually try to work together. There's about 400 and some elected Green MPs around the world, and we do actually work together. So I can take your idea and ask why we haven't done that yet.
Thank you.
I have a question just regarding how, we've had to lurch forward in the tech world here with Zoom meetings and everybody learning all these new things. And And admittedly, one of the things that always bugs me about government is the amount of money that is spent on travel, the amount of pollution that is created by flying everywhere and meetings. I wonder if you see that as something that potentially could be a shift in the way the government works. And then what, you know,
Yeah, I mean,
obviously people can hack into your, you know, computer systems. So we would have to do large investments in security. But I'm curious to hear what you say about
yeah.
that.
Well, I mean, the neat thing is, in terms of parliamentary security, we don't care if it's hacked because everything we do is in public, right? Our votes are public. We should be able to vote remotely. That should have happened in pandemic. But I can't tell you how much. The only part of my job as a member of parliament that I don't like, there's lots of things about being in the Green Party I don't like, but there's nothing about being in parliament that I don't like other than the flying. I have a huge carbon footprint, and it's been at least 15 years that I haven't flown on a vacation, because that's just, you know, I just try very hard to reduce my carbon footprint. And here I'm in this horrific job. Well, it's public service, but you have to be home on the weekends because your constituents expect you to do work in the community and they need you there. They ask you to show up, and if you don't show up, they're not impressed. And at the same time, it's a massive footprint to be back and forth to Ottawa. Right now, it has the added horror of making me think I'm risking my life to go to Ottawa to be in a packed airplane. It's terrifying. But yes, I think people are learning from it. I think we could see, and certainly private sector corporations are looking at it saying, well, look how much money we can save by having people meet from where they are. We don't need to be keep having these meetings where everybody jets all over the place. And another one, of course, is commuters. I think flex time, working from home, I think it's going to completely revolutionize a lot of the expectations around work and how we structure our lives. Some of the really biggest corporations are already saying we don't need to lease all this downtown office space. Now, there's knock-on effects from that. What happens to the cute little restaurants that require all the people leaving their desk at noon to go grab lunch? I mean, there's going to be some real social dislocation, but I don't think we're going to go back to everybody driving to work every day, nor do I think we may be able to get Parliament to at least create the expectation that when we go to Ottawa, we can stay a month before flying home. I mean, the amount of flying when it's every week is horrific. So I think a lot will change. Certainly at the scale of cities. I love how many cities have started doing what Milan initially did, which is say, okay, we're reopening, but we're reopening with bicycles, we're keeping the streets open, and we want the patios where the restaurants are to be able to spill into the street so we can keep the physical distancing and not go back to cars taking over our cities. There's a lot that's going to happen almost organically just because it's still following public health advice to avoid these things. But I think we could see permanent, and I'm not the only one, long-term permanent change in expectations and normal behaviors is really already underway. And it's all good for, well, all of it that I can think of is going to be good for reducing greenhouse gases too. Probably have taken up too much of your time on questions. I'll take some more, but I'm in your hands because I know you have your AGM to get to.
I've got one more question. I'm curious, just on that note, around if there's any discussion around a reduced work week. You know, I know some governments in some places have pushed for that, and the meaningful experiences that we've had with more time with family, more time connecting in our communities, and how that can be.
Well, I know Sonia First now and the BC Greens have been advocating for a 4-day work week. We've seen it picked up in Europe. Definitely Paul and Jenica and I love the idea. And thanks, Gareth. This allows me to reinforce something else about the Greens, is that the leader or MPs, we don't get to make up policy. And the policy comes from our membership. So I'm hoping that the policy convention that has not yet been scheduled, but I'm pushing for it to be in 2020, virtually. We have I don't know how many of you have been to Green conventions or brought policy forward, but there's a 90-day requirement of notice. And more or less through inadvertence, I think, a few other issues, but we didn't get around to getting out the notice for policy for the October 4th convention that was supposed to have been happening in Charlottetown. So just to bring you up to date, there will be a biannual general meeting on the dates that we were going to be in Charlottetown. We won't be in Charlottetown, and it will be both virtual and enough people physically in the same room that it constitutes a proper BGM under our Constitution. And then we'll have to have another special general meeting. So that'll be the meeting where we announce who the next leader is. And then probably sometime later in 2020 or early 2021, but I'm determined it not be later than that, we'll have a policy convention and bring these things forward. I would love to see our members bring forward a resolution for a 4-day work week. And I would love to see our members pass such a resolution, because I think it's really important for a lot of reasons, for sanity, for work-life balance, to start preparing for artificial intelligence, to start spreading the work more by having people work fewer hours but have more life as a result of working fewer hours. All of those things and the economics of it add up to make a 4-day work week make a lot of sense. But it's not current Green Party policy because it hasn't come before a convention yet. But it will, I hope.
Thank you very much, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Yeah, well, we're going to go forward with some of the housekeeping parts of our.
Do you mind if I say good night then, Corey? I've been on this Zoom since 8:30 this morning, and I'm kind of zoomed out. So I'd love, thank you, Greens. Thank you. Please remember to vote in the leadership race. I can't tell you who I want to have elected because there's so many really good ones. But please vote. Please get engaged and make sure we have a huge voter turnout and make sure your friends and neighbors who think they're Greens or people who donate to the Green Party, make sure they really are Greens, because every vote's going to be important in choosing the leader that I hope will take us to at least 12 seats in the next election. So I'm gonna say goodnight if that's not rude.
No.